It's horrible way of saying that. Oh, yeah.
The menorah is on the top.
That's a little bright. Now I got a ring right here.
It's spots out there now, huh?
One right where your face is. It's great. Now I'm not going to be able to hit anything on it in Africa. My vision's all screwed up. There, now I have an excuse now when I come home at the end, right? Somebody's
We're going wild game hunting.
That's what we're doing. Dad and I are going for like a 5-day, 6-day hunt, something like that. But it's 4 days there, 4 days back.
You get yourself one of them scopes that actually takes a picture too.
That costs money that I don't want to spend. This is already costing me enough.
Well, who's going to believe you then?
I got my cell phone. I'm going to take pictures. Giraffe. If I see one, I'll probably take a picture of it anyway because they're kind of this cool.
Well, they're not legal.
You can shoot giraffes, yes. They're just really expensive. So the way since the front row's curious, so the way this works apparently is you go to a place. It's not like here you have to apply for a license. You show up and they literally hand you like a piece of paper that has a list of everything you can shoot and how much it costs. And you go, I'll take that one, please, and then you go out and shoot it, and then you pay them the money. Like that's how it works.
Do they dress it for you then?
Yes, they do.
Really?
Yep.
So how big is the preserve that you hunt on?
Where'd Dad go? Dad, how big is the place? Wasn't it like 50,000 acres or something that they own? Hunter's Hill, don't they own like 50,000 acres or some ridiculous thing? 55,000 that they control themselves. So it's a big place.
So they're kind of like in the wild.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it's like they just have this area they own.
Right, I realize.
They do some management too.
Fenced.
I don't think so. I don't think it's fenced. But they do some herd management. Like they will go out and cull animals and like they'll treat them and stuff. And they actually do breed animals and release them to
Sure.
for trophy and whatever. So it's semi-managed, but they're still running around out in the boondocks. So
You just go and have fun.
we'll find out, I guess. We'll see.
What are you going to shoot? My son wanted to know.
I'm going to shoot. What am I going to shoot?
A zebra.
I'm going to shoot a zebra because Catherine wants a zebra.
Zebra.
Zebra?
She said, and I quote, I want a zebra skin rug for the basement. And I said, okay.
Nice.
So that's what we're going to try to do.
That's right.
Because when your wife says, hey, I want this dead animal in the house, you don't say no to that. Because usually what do the wives say about the dead animals?
Especially if you want to go.
Get that thing out of here. That's what they usually say, right?
Yeah, but that's just horse meat. Are you going to eat it?
They cook it for you while you're there, so.
There you go.
They must go.
Yep.
You can't bring meat home?
Can't bring the meat home because of agriculture
Yeah,
import
I kinda
restrictions.
thought that
You
was
can bring the
probably-
hide and certain bones and like hooves and horns and that kind of stuff.
that you go?
South Africa. So we're flying into South Africa, going to Johannesburg, and then we're going to fly to East London, which is like, so this is South Africa, this is the Atlantic, this is the Indian. I'm doing this backwards for you guys.
Right.
But it's right for me. Anyways, East London's like, so Johannesburg's up here toward the top, East London's down here on the coast, and then we go inland a little ways from there on the car for a while into the sticks.
So you're taking the family with, right?
Yeah, my dad.
He's taking you.
That's right. He's taking me. It's not up to me. It's his thing.
Good deal. Pretty cool.
Well, we'll see.
You'll have to
If
build
we all
an
come back with our fingers and toes and possessions and everything, we'll be all right.
You build an extra room when you mount them things.
Don't shoot fireworks.
Yeah, we'll just go add one on to the parsons. We'll do a 3-stall garage in the backyard there.
With zebra heads in there and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, all right. Let's do something more godly. Psalm 124 is our psalm today. Let us pray. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when people rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us up alive, when their anger was kindled against us. Then the flood would have swept us away, the torrent would have gone over us, then over us would have gone the raging waters. Blessed be the Lord, who has not given us as prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. Page 1346 in the back of the Bible, and then we get to do the last question under the office of the keys. What do you believe according to these words?
I believe that when the called ministers of Christ deal with us by his divine command, in particular when they exclude openly unrepentant sinners from the Christian congregation, and absolve those who repent their sins and want to do better, this is just as valid and certain, even in heaven, as if Christ our dear Lord dealt with us himself.
In particular, when they exclude openly unrepentant sinners. Because that's the part everyone's always happy when the pastor has to do that, right?
Anybody need one?
All right, let's recap. What do we understand modern Judaism to be? What is our working definition?
People who live in Israel, maybe.
No, not the people who live in Israel, because first of all, there are Jews outside of Israel, and secondly, not all Israelites are Jews.
Okay.
There is a minority population of both Christians and Muslims in Israel.
Modern Pharisees.
Well, that's a definition that isn't incorrect, right?
Those descended from Abraham who resist Christ.
Reject Christ.
Reject Christ.
Right, so it's the people descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who reject Christ but still try to observe the Old Testament customs. That's our working definition. And so what we have is an interesting phenomenon in that, as we went through last time, the people that lived after the Romans swept through Jerusalem and the surrounding area was the sect of the Pharisees, which means all of the surviving modern Jewish factions are descended from the Pharisees in the way that they did theology, which was distinct from other groups like the Sadducees and the Essenes. And then, of course, we talked about how in the modern world, because there is no temple, that the modern Jews focus more on a lifestyle, a way of living according to the commands of God in the Old Testament, as interpreted by rabbis, modern and historic, through things like the Talmud and the Mishnah, and of course the Midrashes, which are your Midrashim, I suppose to be the plural, but your modern Jewish sayings that come from the rabbis. And so their source of authority is a mixture of tradition, contemporary interpretation, and the Old Testament scriptures. Okay, so they do theology different than, say, we Christians do. Does that make sense? And then we talked about, God and Scripture, tradition, the Messiah, and all that stuff, and they don't believe Jesus is coming, all this sort of thing. All right, so we all kind of caught up to speed what we were talking about last time. So today, what I want to do is to talk about the different sects of the modern Jews. And this is very broad because you can get into these and divide them up further. So it's kind of like when someone teaches an introduction to Christianity and they talk about the Orthodox, the Catholics, and the Protestants, which is a gross oversimplification, as I complained about in my sermon today, but it is generally how people try to broadly talk about these things. Personally, I would argue there's a fourfold division in Christianity: the Catholics, the Orthodox, the Protestants, and the others. I mean, think about it. Like, what is a Methodist protesting? Because Methodism is a second or third generation movement that comes out of Anglicanism, right? So they're not protesting like we protested the imperial officers at the diet of whatever that diet was. That one where we got called Protestants. Yes. That's a conversation for another day, though. So we're going to talk first about the ones that are probably most recognizable to you. The Orthodox Jews. Now this includes lots of different groups. There's the Hasidic Jews. I'm trying to remember some of the other names, but Hasidic is a major subtype of these. But the Orthodox Jews are very recognizable because they do maintain a traditional dress. So you see one, you're like, oh, that guy's obviously a Jew. And when you think of Judaism, this is often what people think of. So you got the long hair, the funny hat, the prayer shawl, dressed in black, right? That's what you think of. And it's funny because there are significant divisions amongst Orthodox Jews based on what kind of hat you wear. Seriously, like there's Russian Orthodox Jews that wear a certain hat that's square, and then you got the round hat. I mean, there's all kinds of different hats, and like there's a significant thing about the hats that shows you which little subtype you're part of. I'm not versed on it well enough to say more than that, but that's what you think of. Now, why does the Orthodox Jew grow out a big beard and grow his hair long?
It's groovy, man.
Because it's groovy. Well, that's why hippies do it, but it's because, why?
Old Testament.
Because in the Old Testament it says that a man shall not put a razor to his beard and shall not shave the hair on his temples. So they let at least the hair on their temples and their beards grow out. So you can get a haircut here, but you got to let this go. So if you've ever seen, and then they'll like curl it, and put a little style to it. So if you've ever seen because you think about it, you got hair this long hanging off the side of your head. If you don't curl it, it's in the way. So if you ever see Jews in traditional dress walk around and they got the little curled hair lock on either side of their head, it's because the Old Testament forbids men of the Jewish extraction in the Old Testament covenant from cutting the temple hair.
They have to do that all their lives.
Yep. Same reason with this prayer shawl, the tassels on it are explicitly commanded in the Old Testament as well. So they're very observant. So what do we want to say about them? They have a very strong emphasis on the halakha, which is the Jewish law, which is both the scriptures and the teaching of the rabbis written in things like the Talmud and contemporary application. They're very traditional in how they apply and interpret the law. So they're functionally like Jewish Amish, right? Or like the Hutterites. They have their own communities. They don't live in regular neighborhoods, so they tend to set up their own places. So like if you've ever been to New York, there are certain neighborhoods that are Jewish neighborhoods, and it's really hard to move into that neighborhood if you're not Jewish. It's these kinds of groups that have taken over those neighborhoods and live there and set up their own intentional communities in order to maintain their way of life. Because it's really hard if you're going to be a traditional Jew to go off and live, say, in Oaks, North Dakota by yourself and maintain all your traditions, right? So you tend to want to live by other people like you. It's the same reason why. And then there's also, usually with that, there's an idea that we don't want to be defiled by the impure wider culture, and so we have to be separate from them. The same thing that you see with the Hutterites. Why do the Hutterites go off and do their own thing? Because at least the earliest iteration of the Hutterites, which is the Amish, the earliest is the Mennonites, but you have the Amish, right? They don't want a lot of modern technology. They're trying to preserve their traditional way of life, and they don't want to mix up with the English, which is all of you sinners. And so they have their own separate communities and churches and everything else, and they don't exactly deal with a lot of people. Same kind of mindset here. So think about the Orthodox Jews as like Jewish Amish, okay? That's the best analogy I can think of. And again, there's kind of a gradient. They're all going to dress in traditional manner, but some are going to be a little bit more accustomed to the modern world and some a little bit less. Some are going to be kind of Amish and they don't like modern technology. Some are going to be more like the Hutterites and that they use modern technology, but they're still distinguished by a particular conservative, traditional usage of the Jewish law and a particular a way of living their life, including things like their traditional dress. They also are incredibly rigid and traditional in gender roles. Women do not usually, it's very exceptional if a woman works outside the house. Only men can be rabbis. Only men can read or pray at the synagogue. So, they're very, very traditional in that way. Tom?
You kind of touched on it, because I was going to say, so actually the thing that they all adhere to is their traditional conservative. But so you can't tell me that it's because they're all dressed like that they don't have issues, because they're complaining about whose hat they're wearing.
Well, everybody's got issues, Tom.
So I know we all do, but it's like they think they're okay because they dress like that.
Well, okay, so let's put ourselves in the mindset. So Tom's asking, what's the deal with this sectarian sort of mentality? And I'm going to do my best because I'm not a sectarian. I live in a regular town with regular people next door to me, right? So, and I don't want to be a sectarian because, Could I go off and start my own little cult church and get 3 people to join it and have a perfect church in my own mind? Sure, why not? But I don't want to be a sectarian, because sectarianism always sells the promise of purity, but then you figure out very quickly that the sect also has sinners in it, and it doesn't actually solve that. But let's put ourselves in the mind of a Jewish Orthodox person to see why they would do this. Okay? We're going to think like them for a minute. So you are in, say, the year 1000. And the temple has been destroyed for a long time now. How do you do what God commanded you to do of old when you can't go to the temple and make sacrifices, which is a huge part of the Old Testament? What's left to you?
Kind of the lifestyle.
The lifestyle, the stuff that you did when you were in exile in Babylon, when the temple was destroyed for that, 40 years, give or take, or whatever it was, 70 years, 40 years, whatever that was. I'm having a brain fart this morning. So you look to those scriptures, things like Ezra and Nehemiah, Elijah, to see what the emphasis is there, and you take your cues from that. So though Jason's exactly right, what's left is the moral stuff and the lifestyle stuff, right? So you emphasize that in the time when there is no temple. You fervently pray and hope the temple will be rebuilt so you can do all the things that the Bible says you should do. But in the meantime, what's left to you is doing the traditional things that the Old Testament commands and the rabbis have interpreted and taught to you, and to live the lifestyle that they prescribe you to live. So that's what you focus on, because by doing that, you're keeping faithful to the covenant that God gave you to the degree that you are able to do that. Does that make sense? So you can only do the parts that are left for you to do, but you have to do them with great vigor. And you have to do them very strictly, because God's obviously mad at you because he let the temple get destroyed. You see what I'm saying? So you gotta do what you can.
Isn't it amazing when you think about that? Because they are slaves to that. And you talk about being slave and free. We're free in Christ.
Well, again, they're descended from the Pharisees.
Like living in slavery.
Well, these guys are descended from the Pharisees, and consequently, they have, as we Lutherans would call it, a very legalistic way of understanding their relationship to God. So this is not how they would see it. This is how I, as a Lutheran, would interpret it, right? That they are enslaved to these commands and these traditions. This is the thing that Paul wrestles with, by the way, when we went through Romans 9, 10, and 11. This is the exact attitude Paul is really struggling with these people who refuse to come to Christ and give up the traditions of their elders. And he is really frustrated by it because there's freedom in that they don't know. And they prefer the servitude of the old covenant to the grace of Christ. And that's when Paul's really big struggles. Now, he's very optimistic that they will eventually be brought back into the church. But but put yourself in their mindset, right? Your temple's destroyed. God's still your God, and he's got all these commands. So you find the ones that you can still do, and you cling to them stubbornly, aggressively, right? Because that's all you have left. And again, as we talked about last time too, all 3 of these major divisions of modern Jews see as a major defining characteristic of their religion and their ethnicity that they were specially chosen by God, right? And so you put that with this, I'm chosen by God and God's given me these commands. Well, I better do my part so God doesn't get super mad at me, you know? Jason?
Well, I was just saying, Orthodox Judaism has an analog in confessional Lutheranism.
Yes, we do. I didn't want to bring that up. Thank you.
I mean, again, traditional interpretation, yes, but ours is biblical, right? Traditional gender roles, yes, because of this, because of what the Bible says.
Right.
Male-only rabbis, male-only pastors.
Right? Yeah, this group should seem somewhat familiar to us. I mean, we have customs and traditions we cling to greatly, stubbornly, even. We have traditional generals, male-only pastors. Like this group is probably, in terms of morals and lifestyle, is going to seem. If you get past the weird dress and like the way that they pray being different, there's a lot of things about how they organize themselves that would speak to a good cross section of confessional Lutherans. But the difference is we relate to these things differently than they do. So, like for example, traditionally, the woman, if she did anything economically productive, was tied to the home because she had to be there to take care of the kids, right? Like that's just a historical observation. It's not a moral claim. In the modern world, we have ladies who work outside of the house, and by and large, confessional Lutherans don't yell at women if they have a job outside of the house, right? You will find a few that do. But for the most part, we don't. We just say, well, we should not do that to the exclusion of the joys of the domestic life because we don't want to fall into the feminist trap that says children are a burden and terrible, right? That's all we try to say, you know? So what I'm trying to say is that they wouldn't allow for that. Because we see these things as a way of life that is a gift, but it's also not servitude and slavery. So, if you have to go work a part-time job, lady, or a full-time job to pay the bills, nobody's going to yell at you because you got to take care of your family, right? Is that a perfect world? No, but it's necessary sometimes, isn't it? And then you can ask Catherine, too. Could Catherine and I make it on what you guys pay me? Probably. But you know what she would do? She would go crazy if she was stuck at home with the kids and didn't have a way to go and interact with adults for her 1 or 2 days a week that she works. So again, I don't want to yell at anyone about that. This group here would be very strict about that, but Jason's right. We do have people like that with us. Gary?
God gave these people the right, they believe, to exist and to perpetuate. Right now, their parenting abilities are up to 3.5%.
Yeah,
the children coming 3.5 children.
Yeah, the Orthodox Jews are having kids way above the average in America.
If all the men looked like that, it's amazing they have any children.
Well, if you're one of the ladies, that's all you get to choose from.
Cheapers.
Catherine, do you have something to say?
Is this the group that doesn't talk to women though outside?
Yes. Very traditional gender roles. So this is one thing that would seem different. So much like when we think of Muslims, how Muslim men do not talk to women who are not related to them, these guys will not talk to women. I mean, at least the stricter end of this, which is most of them, will not talk to women that they are not related to or married to in public. They'll make you talk. They want to talk to your husband, right? And now, why do they do that? And now, sometimes it's because they're actually chauvinists. Okay, they do exist. But let's do our 8th commandment construction on this. Why would they do that? Because they don't want to open up their families to the air of scandal, that they're associating with women who they're not their spouses. Do you see what I'm saying? Because in traditional gender role communities, things like infidelity are taken incredibly seriously. And so you don't want to even have a whiff of a scandal that something weird's going on, So, anyways.
Well, the main difference, they're living in Old Testament times.
Yeah, the best they can.
We're living in New Testament times.
Yeah, these guys they're stuck in the Old Testament as much as they're able to do in the Old Testament, because that is their religion.
The first 5 books, basically.
Well, they do the whole Old Testament, right? So they got everything all the way through Malachi.
Okay.
But yeah, that's their emphasis. And again, as you go through time, because the sacrificial system of the temple is not in place, you notice less of an emphasis on ritual purity and forgiveness of sins through the sacrifices of the temple, peace offerings, sin offerings, atonement offerings, right? And you see more emphasis on lifestyle and on personal morality. And so here's the problem. This is a theological problem I've never heard a good answer from any Jewish source I've read. In the Jewish system, forgiveness from God is only effected through the temple, through doing the sacrifices that are there for the remission of guilt with sins, right? How do you get forgiven when the way that you got forgiven was through these sacrifices of the temple when that temple doesn't exist? Can you?
Yes, no.
No, probably not, which is why there's this really strong emphasis on never stepping out of line or doing anything wrong. Because there's kind of this paranoia in the background of modern Jewish thought that there might not be forgiveness without the old system that's been out of play now for 2,000 years. Now, they would never say that, but it's something you can kind of sniff out when you start reading their literature. At least I think I sniff out, but I'm not an expert in this stuff, so you can disagree with me on that.
You start talking about the covenants of Scripture, they're still under the first covenant.
Yeah.
Follow all the laws. If you do so perfectly, you can go to heaven. And since you can't, sacrifice 2 turtle doves, a cow, a pig.
Except they can't do that part, which
Yeah, but
is
they
where they're
can't
in
do that
trouble.
part. So
Right.
So there had to be just one temple. They couldn't.
God commanded there be one temple built on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. That's a major theme if you read through the prophets of the Old Testament, by the way, because the northern kingdom of Israel, after Israel and Judah split up under the reign of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, they split, right? The kingdom divides in half. The south half, which is predominantly the tribe of Judah, starts being called Judah, which is where eventually we get the word Jew, because Jew means citizen of Judah. It's the first 2 letters of Judah. And the northern kingdom still calls itself Israel, and they're under a general. What's his name? The name of the general. It was one of Solomon's generals that led the rebellion. Oh boy, I should remember this guy's name. Began with a J. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Anyways, they start setting up, because the temple's in the south in Jerusalem, right? They set up their own temple on Mount Gerizim, which they call Bethel, the house of God. And the prophets do not like Bethel, right? They get real mad about that, which is also why I think it's funny when you run into churches called Bethel, which is literally house of God, when that was the name of a pretender temple that was condemned in the Old Testament. These things make me giggle, you know? Thank you. I'm glad somebody appreciates what I find amusing in the Bible.
Simple.
All right, so we kind of get an idea for these guys, right? So I'll give you an example. When I was in Jerusalem, we were staying in the Lutheran hostel. Let me give you a picture here. So, like, I want to draw a map. So, like, this is the Lutherans own, well, the liberal Lutherans now, not our kind of Lutherans. They own like a whole block. And then, so this is where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is, the traditional burial and crucifixion site of Jesus. Awesome place. If you go there, check it out. But kitty corner from it, because like this street's like this, right? There's a mosque right here. It's obnoxious. It has all its speakers pointed down at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So when they call the prayer, it just drowns it. Anyways, but the bells in this church, they have bells that are like 20 feet wide. They're so big that when they ring them, the ground shakes. And those bells are louder than their loudspeakers. And this is when I got sold on church bells in a really tangible way, because the Muslim call to prayer times roughly correspond to the traditional Christian monastic prayer hours. And so they start doing their call to prayer, and all of a sudden the bells go, and the whole ground shakes, and you can't hear them. And it's like, the bells say Jesus wins. That's why I love church bells. It's a really great experience. I'm not gonna lie.
You can get a bell here when they have a mosque someplace close by.
I want a bell anyway. We want to get ahead of this curve, right? We want to get ahead of it. So this right here, there's a Lutheran church here. It's a liberal Lutheran church, but there's a Lutheran church here that's built by Kaiser Wilhelm I in the 1800s. It's a beautiful church. They actually have an English-speaking congregation. When I was in the ELCA, I applied to do a 3-year rotation here as their pastor. I got rejected. I'm not liberal enough. But over here, on this end of the block, is the Lutheran hostel, where you can stay, which is owned by the state German Lutheran Church. And anyways, if you go down this road here, eventually you'll get to the Temple Mount. It's basically a straight shot, right? So I'm standing, the door's over here, I'm standing right here, minding my own business, on the sidewalk. It's toward evening on Friday night, and I'm like looking at things in the sky or whatever I was doing, was gawking, you know. I think I was trying to figure out where the liquor store was so we could go get something to have a cigar and, and sit out back in the patio and do something that night. But anyways, I'm sitting there, and this dude, dressed like, he's like 16 maybe. He didn't have facial hair yet, but he's coming down, and he's got his head down, and he's taking huge strides. Why is he taking huge strides?
Gotta get home.
Because he's got to get to the Temple Mount, because it's sundown, it's Sabbath now, right? He only is allowed to take so many steps on the Sabbath. And so he's counting his steps to make sure he has enough steps to do what he wants to do. I'm watching him do this. And I'm standing there, I see him coming out of my eye, he runs right into me. And he had to take a sidestep and threw off his count. And he was really, really mad about it. Even after I apologized, even though it wasn't my fault, because I was just standing there minding my own business. I did not step into it in any way. Right? This is the stereotypical sort of way these guys do things. They're so focused on following these rules that the rabbis have added to make the Old Testament commands like a way of life, that if you interfere with that even accidentally, you are like the worst thing in the world, and people get really upset with you. But they've come up with some crazy stuff too, like what do they call it, the Ahuv, the wire, the Ahuv, isn't that what they call that? It goes around the neighborhood. So like on Sabbath, you're only allowed to walk around inside your domicile, because if you go out of your domicile, then you're working, and that's a sin. So at home, you can walk where you want. So the rabbi said, well, this doesn't work very good. So they come up with this idea of an Ahuv, which is a wire that you string up around your property, and everything inside the wire then is considered your domicile. So they have like a whole neighborhood in New York that's got the wire strung up around it, so you can just go around the whole neighborhood on the Sabbath and do what you want.
Is that electrified?
No, it's just wire. But it fell down one day, and it was a crisis, because if the wire is not up and intact, then it doesn't count. And it fell down, and like the whole community didn't know it, and all of them violated the Sabbath, and it was like a huge crisis for them. It made the New York Times, actually, because it was that big of a deal to them.
Did a deer run through it?
No, I think that it got bumped during construction, because they hang it off of like the highline poles and whatever else, and somebody bumped it and it fell down.
You could have helped this guy out. Maybe you could have given him his phone so he could keep track of his steps.
I could have carried him too.
Yeah.
Just picked
That's right.
All right, so do you guys get an idea of how these guys are? Sectarian, it's very traditional, very hyper-focused on the teachings of the rabbis and the scriptures. These guys read the Bible and read the Talmud and read the Mishnah all the time. Like, it's just, they're fundamentalist about it, if you will. Right? Kind of get a flavor of these guys?
Do they actually work? Do they produce anything?
Oh, yeah, they
just
got
walk
jobs and
around
stuff.
doing this all
You know, it's fascinating because when you think of a Jew, okay, if I was to say, give me a stereotypically Jewish occupation, you would say
Lawyer.
lawyer,
Banker.
doctor. What?
Oh,
Secret
Hollywood
agent.
agent.
Hollywood agent, yeah, you could say Hollywood, banking, medicine, or finance, or law, right? You do white-collar professions. These guys are predominantly blue-collar, which you would not expect, right? They tend to be more blue-collar. Seriously, the Orthodox Jews have a much higher rate of blue-collar workers than the conservative or the Reform Jews. Because, again, they don't want to be involved in Hollywood, banking, or lawyering, or any of that stuff, because that's full of sinful, dirty, rotten, Gentiles. We don't want to deal with them. Or as they like to call us, the Goyim.
I hope it's not food services.
I'm sure. Well, it's like the famous Jewish delis. That's blue collar work. A lot of them started by groups like this.
hair on the dog.
Anyways, no, I'm not saying they all are. I'm just saying that it's a much higher percentage of blue collar than you'd expect, which also fits their birth rate patterns. The less white collar you are, the more likely you are to have a bunch of kids. Blue collar people historically and contemporarily have way more kids than white collar people do. The more education you got, the fewer kids you have. You know why the Muslims outbred us, by the way, in North Africa in the 7th and 8th centuries? Because the Christians were all white collar. We were the doctors and the engineers and the lawyers and the farm managers and all that stuff. And they had like 7 kids being laborers, and we were having like 3. That's just something we have to take consider. What I'm saying is education's good, just don't let it get in the way of having a family. That's all. All right, so then we're going to go with the middle group, the conservative Jews. Now this, as you can see, we still have some traditional dress, right? Hats. We like our hats. This hat, all the Jews wear. So like even the conservative or the Orthodox Jews, they have this underneath their other hats. This is called a kippah. Thank you. It's called a kippah, but it is called a yarmulke. But that is a like Russian pidgin. What's the language that they speak? Yiddish way of doing it. It properly is called a kippah. I got one time because when I was in Israel, I had to wear one to go into this one museum, and so I kept it. Which is, never mind. I was going to make a bad joke about Jewish people stealing things, but that's a problem. Because I was going to say, it was probably the most Jewish thing I did was keep that hat. Ha, 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 ha. Oh, that's terrible and racist. All right, so this is the middle of the road group. So famous people that you would think of in this group, Ben Shapiro comes to mind. He is a conservative Jew. You guys all know Ben Shapiro, right?
Right.
So this is his faction. And again, there are divisions within this. We're talking in real broad strokes here. So they also strongly emphasize the halakha, which is the law written in Old Testament and all that stuff. But they are more open to modern scholarship. So the Orthodox Jews are going to be strict creationists, literal seventh day, like we are. These guys are going to be more open to be things like theistic evolutionists. Like God still does it, but science says they're much more compromising. So if we were to plot, like, say, the very strictest confessional Lutherans are like the Orthodox, these guys would be like the more progressive end of the LCMS. I should say progressive, that's a bad word. But the more modernized end of the LCMS into things like the NALC or the LCMC. Right? That would be where these guys would fit. So they try very hard both to keep their traditions and to integrate into regular society. They live in regular neighborhoods, they work in regular jobs, but they still go to temple and so on and so forth. Now, you can imagine this is a difficult thing to do because if you're not in a community of other Jews like you, it's much harder to observe all of the very rigorous commands and customs that you have to observe, right? So this is a delicate balancing act with these guys. They're always trying to figure out how do I, as a Jewish person, keep my customs without being totally absorbed by the culture, but at the same time not withdrawing away from it to a commune or a sectarian community, okay? Because of their integration, they range from being more on the traditional end. You'll find parts of this that they only have male rabbis, But as a whole, they have male and female rabbis, right? Because it's kind of like, when you get to the middle of Lutheranism, it ranges from more conservative to less conservative and more liberal, right? This is kind of the same spread. So if you have the Orthodox Jews on the one side, always conservative, very traditional, which would be most of your confessional Lutherans, and then you have kind of that edge of confessional Lutheranism that's a bit more modern, into things like the middle of their old Lutheran churches like the NALC and the LCMC, which split out of the ELCA. That's where these guys would hang out. And in that stretch, there's a lot of different things. Because like the most liberal LCMS people do not have lady pastors, right? But the NALC and the LCMC do, But you'll find people in the NALC that argue that they shouldn't have women ordained at all. So like what I'm saying is there's a variance in there. But generally speaking, they're generally egalitarian, generally have male and female rabbis. They have a range of positions on things like moral issues, gender roles, abortion, LGBT. So like, for example, you have Ben Shapiro, who on all of the moral issues is very conservative. He's anti-abortion. He's anti-gay marriage, right? Two people who are more comfortable with that stuff. Okay, so there's quite a range there. And so they, like I said, they're holding this really awkward position of trying to have one foot in the world of modernity and one foot in the world of the traditions of their ancestors and navigate that. That kind of characterizes them. But they are generally serious about their religion. Okay, they're not progressives the way like Unitarian Universalists are supposedly progressive Christians. Though the fact is they reject the Trinity, so they're not really Christian. But you get what I'm saying? So they're still serious about their religion. They go to temple, which is the synagogue. They still do all the stuff they're supposed to do. They pray, etc. Okay. Make sense? This is the group where you're going to start finding your stereotypical Jewish professions. Lawyers, doctors, Hollywood executives, and so on and so forth, right? Does that make sense? And then the last group is the Reform Jews. This is the liberal Protestants of the Jewish world. All right? These guys are, I'm going to try to eighth commandment this, so you have to bear with me. In their thought, they're really, really, really focused on a concept called tikkun olam, which is their version of the idea of social justice, right? So what is social justice? Social justice is cultivating a particular way of life for a group of people or a nation. That's my eighth commandment construction on social justice. And as you guys know, not a big fan of the concept of social justice, but eighth commandment, that's what they would say. So they're really focused on that. And they consciously say this is way more important than the halakha, which is the teaching of the laws about lifestyle and morals. And so they will actually, in order to pursue this social justice, whatever that means, they will actually consciously contradict this stuff. Like just straight up be like, yeah, we don't care about that. Which if that doesn't sound like progressive Christians, then you haven't talked to them very long because they do the same thing. So much like how progressive Christianity sort of is just the culture written into the religion, the same phenomenon is here. So they are radically egalitarian. If you want to be counted as a Jew for a conservative or an Orthodox synagogue, you must be patrilineally descended from a male Jew, right? So Marty here could not be a Jew unless his dad was a Jew and his dad's dad was a Jew, or so on and so forth. Otherwise, he would have to convert, and there's a whole process for that. It's very difficult to become Jewish through conversion. These ones, they say it's either by patrilineal or matrilineal descent, which is a radical thing for the Jews because no other Jewish groups recognize other than the Reformed Jews. They use modern services, and they have their own version of like contemporary worship that they do. They use the vernacular. They do not speak Hebrew. So if you go to a conservative synagogue or an Orthodox synagogue, you're going to find people reading the scriptures in Hebrew. Right? That's one of the bar mitzvah things. The kids got to get up and read it in Hebrew. Like they still do that. These guys like, nah, we're just going to read it in English. They don't even bother. And their whole system of theology and morals is built around the idea of personal autonomy, which is effectively the same thing that progressive Christianity builds its whole system of moral and theology around, is just personal autonomy. I'm free to do what I want to do. You guys have to celebrate me. Okay? Basically the same phenomenon there. So notice the people in the background. I know you can't see. So these three ladies are praying at a Reformed Jewish gathering. But notice in the background that if you were to walk in there, and other than they're all wearing scarves, which is kind of like their modern adaptation of the prayer shawls, this would look like your average mainline liberal Protestant church gathering. You know, like they dress the same, they carry themselves the same, and unless you started paying attention to the rituals, it probably wouldn't immediately jump out at you that these folks are a different religion, right? Because when you look in the background, you can see some men in the background. None of them have their kippah on. They're not wearing the hats, right? None of them are wearing their prayer shawls with the tassels, you know.
So of the three, are these the one that would have the people who believe in Jesus?
Mm-mm.
That's a
None of these
one.
believe in Jesus.
Really?
None of them do. Because remember how we defined Judaism to start with? The Old Testament people of God descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who reject Christ. Because the ones that accept Christ become Christians. Right? They're Christians now. Because that's what makes you a Christian, is believing in Jesus.
So they're Jews, but they're Christians. They're Christian Jews.
They're ethnically Jewish, religiously Christian. These people are religiously Jewish of whatever extraction, mostly of that particular line, or at least that's what they claim. So anyways, this is basically your liberal Protestant version of Judaism. And they're just as out to lunch on morals and everything else as the liberal Protestants are. They're pro-LGBT, radically so, very feminist, just, pro-abortion, all that stuff. So like, here's one for you. When you run into a Jewish person who controls, say, I don't know, the pornography industry, because that is true actually, this is where they come from. The Reformed Judaism. Because conservatives would not produce pornography, and the Orthodox certainly wouldn't. So when you see that kind of stuff going on, or you got your Harvey Weinsteins who are sleeping with women, to get them into movie roles, this is where they come up. This is that faction of Judaism. Now here's the thing, because I promised you that we would try to answer the question, why don't people like the Jews? So, broadly speaking, there's a few things. First of all, we think of Jews as a sectarian people. Because what we do is we take these three distinct groups and we blend them all together in our minds. Right. So we take the sectarianism of the Orthodox. Because the Orthodox Jews do not become good citizens of their country. They do their own thing and they don't really care what happens to the rest of us. Right? They only pay their taxes because otherwise the IRS is coming after them. You get what I'm saying? Like, they're not community-minded the way conservative or reform Jews would be. Okay? So we think that we take that sectarianism. Americans do not like sectarians. Western people in general do not like sectarians. That's why we went after the Anabaptists. The Catholics and the Lutherans and the Reformed all quit fighting each other to go beat up the Anabaptists during the Middle Age or the Reformation. Why? Because the Anabaptists were sectarian wackadoos, and none of us liked them. So we put aside our differences for a while and went and got rid of those guys. Nobody likes sectarians. Okay, so that's one ingredient. The second thing is, when you think about especially like your conservative and your Reformed Jews, there is a significant truth to the stereotype of the types of professions that they hold. The reasons for this go back to the Middle Ages. So, if you're in the Middle Ages and you are me and I want to start a farm, I need some money. Where do I go to get money?
Jewish banker.
To the Jewish banker. Why do I go to the Jewish banker?
Because he's the one with the money.
No, because he can actually make a living doing it. Because he's allowed to charge me interest because I'm a Gentile. The Jews believe that the prohibitions against usury in the Old Testament only apply to other Jews. So he can charge me interest, which means he'll give me money and I'll make payments to him and he'll make a wage doing that, right? Which is why if you go back to the old days, the old ancient, European banks that go back to the Middle Ages, all started as Jewish banking families because they could do that. Christians could not lend an interest. That was forbidden in the scriptures, and it wasn't until the 20th century that churches started changing their minds about that. And I don't mean exorbitant interest, I mean interest, period. You lend, do not expect to be paid back to you, Jesus says, right? Do not extract into. They took that very seriously. So Marty can't get a loan. I can't get a loan from Marty because Marty's a Christian and he won't make money on it. Why would he give me his money to get nothing back when he could go put it over here and make money, right? But some Jewish guy would lend me money and I'll pay him some interest and I can go start my farm. So now you go through the centuries of doing this. You end up with these extended families who are wealthier than average because of that particular historical reality. And that means that they're primed to invest in new technologies like factories, like putting their kids to medical school, like sending them to law school, like investing in Hollywood studios when they first get off the ground because they got banker money. And so it's an interesting historical, phenomenon that this is over centuries. Now, the second reason we don't like them is because, we have this group the sectarian, because even the conservatives are a little standoffish compared to, say, like Christians, And they have some historical legitimacy to that. I mean, it's not like we haven't tried to kick them out of countries before. Let's just be honest about it. We see them as sectarians, and they have a bunch of money and power. That makes us nervous, right? Because the truth is like, especially when you get to this group, they don't always use their money and power for good things. Because again, if you look at who runs the porn industry, a lot of people who are Jewish involved in that. Again, of this extraction. And then the third thing you add to this is the final ingredient that's led to the modern sort of rise of anti-Semitism, in my opinion. It's all just my trying to put this together. This group, and its absolutely wretched, deplorable moral understanding of things, gets mixed in with all the others. So, when you ask an average, say, 20-year-old, what is a Jew? A sectarian person who has all the money, controls everything, and uses it to promote debauchery and the instability of our country. Right? That's what they see it as, and that is because all three of these things get smushed together. Right? And so, there's always been discomfort with the Jews because they are standoffish people. They do not integrate well. Even the more liberal versions of them don't. But then you add that other stuff to it, and it's easy. Then you start saying like, well, when I look at the World Economic Forum, everyone's last name is Stein. We all know what that means. It's the Steins and Bergs over there telling us we need to eat bugs. Why are they there? Well, because look at their background. Their dad and their dad's dad and their dad's 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 dad were all Fortune 500 company people before the Fortune 500 companies were a thing. You get what I'm saying? So there's all kinds of these family connections that get in there. So what I'm saying is we take things that are just historical happenstance and import moral meaning to them. That being said, there are actual examples of people who are Jewish who also have a very anti-Western, anti-Christian outlook and some resources to try to enforce that on people. And so you put all that together, and it means that everybody gets painted with a broad brush, a negative one. Right? You get what I'm saying? So what I'm trying to tell you is, as with Christians, we must judge people individually based on what they do with what God has given to them for good or for ill. Right? So we can't just lump all the Jews together and say they're all terrible, because some of them do good things, some of them do bad things. And it's easy when we just start painting with a broad brush to dismiss a whole group of people without actually having to think about it or engage with them. And we don't want to fall into that, because that is the kind of scapegoating that does lead to problems like incarcerations and, prison camps and this kind of stuff. It's not good. And wars, yeah.
And then you throw the Muslim attitude in there towards Jews, and that.
Well, right. So if I was to summarize, again, being very broad here, the Christian attitude toward the Jews is one of toleration, begrudging toleration. We put up with the Jews, and I'm talking before modern times, because now in modern times, everybody's cool, we let everyone into our countries, it's fine. But before modern times, you had to be a Christian to live here, or you had to be a Jew. And we only put up with the Jews so long before we would get a little nervous about them. But the reason we tolerated the Jews is because the Christians recognized that these are the people that God brought the Messiah from and promised things of old to. And so we want them around so that we can try to convert them and bring them back into the church. That was our intention behind that. We didn't let the Muslims move into our countries because we saw what happens when they did that historically. They would eventually take over and make problems. I mean, just go look through the history of what happened in North Africa. It's awful. Or the Middle East. Everywhere we think of as Muslim today used to be Christian, But the Jews were a different story because they were never huge numbers. They did some beneficial stuff for society that they could lend money, because, having banks is nice, Capital is a good thing to have, so we put up with them, right? Until there got to be too many, or we thought they had too much power, and then someone would get mad at them, and then we'd have a fight. And there's a really ugly history between Christians and Jews. Partly because of us, partly because of them. As with most things, there's guilt on both sides, Marty.
Very quickly, if we as a general population have disdain for the Jewish people, why is our government so enamored to support everything Israel?
Because the Israeli government has, for its size, the best intelligence service on the face of the planet.
Okay.
Mossad is probably the most, pound for pound, is probably the most capable of intelligence and spy network on the planet. They're doing things, they're punching so far above their weight that they're in the same league as like MI6 or MI5, MI6 and, the CIA and the NSA. Which you think about how much bigger England or the United States is than Israel, how much more resources we have, and that they're still in the same league as us, that tells you something about how far above their weight they're punching, right? And, I don't want to get into the rabbit hole stuff about, that they're blackmailing senators and stuff, but they have actually done that. Like, there's actually verifiable cases where they have blackmailed American politicians to get things favorably done in Congress for Israel. So Mossad is a major part of that, in my opinion. Again, I'm not an expert on this. That's just my opinion. Bob?
Did they sustain from military service, the Jews, like the Hutterites do, on a religious?
The Orthodox do. The conservatives and the Reformed, the conservatives will serve in the military. The Reformed should, but they're all liberals, so I don't know if they do or not. It'd be on a personal level, not a religious level, though. But the Orthodox tend not to, though I can't think of a good religious reason why they wouldn't, other than they just wouldn't handle it well by being away from their people. Because we have chaplains in the service who are Jewish. We have Jewish chaplains, so obviously there must be Jews serving if we have Jewish chaplains, right? I don't know the numbers, though. I don't know what percentage of them serve compared to other populations of religious people. That's something I don't know about. I can look into it, but you won't get an answer for 3 weeks.
It is interesting, though, when you think about what went on in Germany with Hitler. It's like you have to have something to bring people together to hate. Jews, it's like people, I know people that still have this conspiracy that there's like a dozen Jews that are controlling the world.
There are, Tom.
But here's the thing.
I have friends that believe that.
Well, here's the thing, though. Is there a small group of very powerful people who set a lot of the agenda for culture? Yes, that is true. Because what is culture set by? Hollywood, the media. That's the two major things that set that. And that is run by a really small group of people that all know each other and go to the same parties. And because of the historical reasons we talked about, it is also true that there's a lot higher than average number of people in that group who are Jewish. So the question before us is not, are there Jews in powerful places as part of this group of people that are the taste setters of our culture? The question is that inherent to what they're doing, or is it incidental to what they're doing? Right? That's my question. Because the thing is, we forget about in the group of people that are cramming things like gay marriage down our throats, there's a whole lot of people who grew up Christian they're doing it too. So if we're going to blame the people for doing that, let's blame the Christian people too, and maybe even more.
They do. It's like my life sucks. It's somebody's fault.
Well, that's a different thing though, right? Because taste setting is different than you have economic problems. You have economic problems is obviously somebody else's fault. So we're over time. I'm going to finish this up with a thought, and if you want to in 3 weeks, we can talk about this some more. But generally speaking, if you want to have a stable society, you have to do one of two things. You either have to give people a compelling narrative and vision that they unite around to be one people, right? So for us Americans, historically, what's our narrative? We hold these truths to be self-evident. All of our God brought forth on this, we have these self-evident truths. God endowed us with certain unalienable rights, namely life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's our foundational unifying principle. We are all together trying to live in the things that God gave us and set up a government to recognize and protect that. Right? That's a positive unifying feature. And then we have a culture that comes out of that, a broadly Anglo culture that is general American culture. We blow stuff up on the 4th of July. Positive, wholesome, good, right? But there's another way you can do it, and that's by finding somebody that we can all hate together. The problem with that, though, is this is how dictators work, by the way. The dictators are always trying to give you someone to hate together, because in the short term it works really, really well. In the long term, it absolutely falls apart. Because in the long term, you can't hate somebody long enough without that shifting to somebody else. Because if Tom's my problem, and then we sideline Tom, then I got to find someone else to hate. But the problem is,
go to Marty.
Well, this is the thing. I might go to Marty, but Jason might go to Chad. You see what I'm saying? And so then the whole thing fractures. So this is why you can't build a nation on hatred. And that's why I think that we Christians have to be very careful around this anti-Semitism stuff, because we are not supposed to hate anyone as Christians. Even when we observe certain things about the way our country is run, like we can't fall on board with the scapegoating certain people just because there's certain people think. Okay? Every individual person should be held accountable for his or her sins. Period. Full stop. The end.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever.